the pushback that we'll continue to get is that there's not enough money, to operate long-term new transit routes and lines.
Equity advocate Kenya McKnight Ahad shares her perspectives on North Minneapolis and the coming of light rail.
And Met Council, quite frankly, when we talk about the equity pieces of it, I think they're doing a decent job.
This is Democratic Visions. Here's producer Jeff Strate.
Welcome to Democratic Visions. For 2 years, beginning back in 2012, Kenya McKnight Ahad was a fellow with the Bush Foundation. Back then, she wrote, "North Minneapolis is greatly disconnected from our regional systems with limited access to our other aspects of the city of Minneapolis. There are some unique opportunities that can help strengthen connectivity and access." Kenya McKnight Ahad, welcome to this table.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Now, you're interested in light rail transit. Tell me why.
I see it as a major economic development tool that could really create real opportunity for my community and communities like mine across the state and really the country. I went to a conference in 2010, a Smart Growth, New Partners Smart Growth Conference in Charlotte, North Carolina. I was trying to learn more about the equity buzzword, and a group of folks were going to that conference, so I went. And that conference, I learned that it was really a conference for developers. And the next 35 years of America was rolled right before my eyes. And transportation was a major vehicle that was being used to redevelop the inner city.
So what does transit equity mean for those of us out in the suburbs who may not be aware that that is a factor?
I like to attribute it to usage patterns, access, right? And connecting people to transportation systems based on the way they need them and the way they use them.
And that's not working very well right now for North Minneapolis, correct?
I would say that North Minneapolis definitely on an island. It's not well connected to the regional system at all.
It is an island then, huh?
Yeah.
Kind of separated.
Yeah.
What's it like to be a bus rider? Trying to get to work or trying to get to the U of M or a community college? What's it like?
It's crowded. You're waiting long for the buses. Sometimes they're late. Sometimes they come early. But most of all, it's always packed. And so that makes the bus run a lot later. You have to go downtown Minneapolis as a transfer station, if you will, to go to other parts of the city. And so I have nieces that work at the Mall of America. They catch 2 or 3 buses, or then the train, right, just to get to work.
Now, before we go further, here's a brief backgrounder on the Southwest Light Rail and Bottineau Light Rail projects.
The Green Line extension to Eden Prairie is scheduled to open in 2020. The Blue Line extension to Brooklyn Park the following year. From the Target Field Interchange LRT station, the Green extension will skirt the southern edge of North Minneapolis with 3 stations. The Blue Line will have 2 stations, on Olson Memorial Highway and one on Plymouth Avenue near the Minneapolis-Golden Valley boundary. The Green and Blue Lines are part of the multimodal transportation policy plan for our region. That plan includes bus rapid transit, connector bus routes, commuter rail, improved highways and bikeways, and light rail. Funding good transit projects, especially in areas with little economic and political clout, remains hard for some politicians to support, even when a light rail line will spark economic growth over the long haul.
I'm very, very disappointed. I'm very disappointed that again, the Southwest Light Rail line has been made a campaign slogan for those who oppose public transit for the metropolitan area, because it's one of these issues that's just too important.
DFL attempts to provide the state's modest share of funding for Southwest Light Rail were blocked by Republican legislators at the end of the 2015-16 session. That was this May. This ploy put $895 million of federal support for the project in serious jeopardy.
But again, it does come down to money. The pushback that we'll continue to get is that there's not enough money, to operate long-term new transit routes and lines. So,
are they planning more feeder buses to serve these light rail lines in North Minneapolis?
Yeah, there is an idea that one resident, Jamil Ford, and Jim Urkel, who's an environmentalist lawyer, put together this pilot project called the Bus Circulator, where it would pretty much take people from one destination to the next, connecting them to the Botno, connecting people who live on the opposite side of where the Botno is being built, connecting them to Southwest as a feeder system. But there is some conversation about a bus down Penn Avenue, right, that would feed directly into the Southwest line more. But I don't know of any concrete plans or ideas that are solid that says, yes, they're going to be connecting people to the light rail through feeder systems. Not yet.
But we can't just remain hopeful anymore, can we? We need action on this stuff.
And Met Council, quite frankly, when we talk about the equity pieces of it, I think they're doing a decent job at trying to understand that and engaging communities and coming up with some solutions like about what is possible, what isn't. I think the biggest hang-up is money. Not having enough resources to really build out the systems in a way that they need to. And then there's also a lot of resistance on access because, people don't want you to come to the neighborhoods. And, so there's a lot of pushback about who's coming to our neighborhoods, who's going to ride these trains. And so those are just some of the barriers that do exist. But what we're continuing to push is the idea of access to opportunity and building a region of opportunity. As we know, a lot of the jobs are currently in the suburban areas and more are being developed. However, people don't have a way to get there because we don't have bus systems currently that go there, and the light rails do provide access to those job centers. However, if people can't get to the light rail, if we can't build a light rail, then we can't get there. And we're expecting people to drive when people just can't afford to purchase cars necessarily.
Well, there was a study done in August 2014 by something called the MTC Works Pathways program at Minneapolis Technical and Community College. They looked at 4 months of job availability in Eden Prairie, Minnetonka, and St. Louis Park, and here's what they found. It was really interesting. In Eden Prairie, during this 4-month period in 2014, there were 3,824 jobs available. 2,543 of them were available for those who held an associate degree or less. The same in Minnetonka, 4,416 jobs available, of which 2,000 required only an AS degree or less. St. Louis Park, 1,945 jobs available. 1,160 of those required an associate degree or less. This means people going to community colleges can get work if this rail line goes in.
Sure.
And that's coming from North Minneapolis. That's coming from all along the line. There are a lot of kids out here in Eden Prairie aren't going for their 4-year degrees at Harvard or Smith.
Right.
They're going to go to a community college and they're going to want to get jobs along that line. They're not going to want to jump into their car. Economically, too, the Met Council is saying that by 2035, within a half mile of all the stations serving the Southwest Light Rail, 64,000 jobs will be created by 2035. Now, that's just a projection, but that's pretty impressive. But to me, and maybe I think you agree from what we said before, is that it's important to have bus transit connectivity to these lines.
Yes.
Now, how do you work with Metro Transit, the city of Minneapolis, to get that bus connectivity that will serve North Minneapolis?
I think it's clear that people continue to talk about the need to connect the bus systems. Well, now we have the number 30 bus that runs on West Broadway that connects North Minneapolis to Northeast, whereas so before it was just the number 32 bus that ran on Lowry. But the main corridor in North Minneapolis is Broadway, and it was at one point isolated from northeast. At one point, there was not a bus in North Minneapolis that would even take you to West River Road or Broadway Pizza, right there off of West River Road,
Sure.
right? You'd have to get off on Washington just to walk up a couple of blocks. And so that's how disconnected and limited the transportation or transit system has been. But now, one thing Metro Transit did was create the number 30 that goes down Broadway connecting Northeast. So that's one thing that has happened. But if we impress on them that the number 19 or an additional bus needs to run down Penn Avenue, and it needs to be a real commitment that will connect people to the Southwest LRT. I think the Botno, for the most part, you're gonna miss most of the northeast part of North Minneapolis. But again, it is about coming up with a comprehensive plan that looking at the entire transit system in North Minneapolis and figuring out where those connections need to be and then making it happen. Because we're talking about operating perhaps in some cases new buses, but also additional routes, right? And the pushback that we'll continue to get is that there's not enough money, to operate long-term new transit routes and lines. So.
And you're talking about this stuff in your committees, aren't you? At the Met Council committees and.
At the TAB, what we do is we manage the regional solicitation. So we get a pot of funds. Now it's about 160, 70 million, depends.
Sure.
And we get proposals from local governments and state agencies around transportation projects across the region. And we decide on which projects we'll fund. So from the city, county, again, the airport commission at times have things, the airport, the pollution control agency.
Sure.
Those folks, have things. And so we'll fund those projects, and as they come up, we'll discuss them. But on the TAB board, the Transportation Advisory Board, our role isn't really to determine transportation planning for the region. That's more of the broader Met Council board. And these are discussions that they're having. I just don't know how well they're having them in a way that's really showing up as outcomes for people. Because since I've been involved in transportation for the last, time is flying, maybe 5 years, 4 years or so, we've been having very similar conversations. A lot of plans have merged. I've been a part of the Midtown Alternative Analysis, studying Lake Street and the Midtown Greenway about streetcars. And so we have tons of plans about what is possible. What we don't have is implementation strategies and resources to really get it done.
Sure. In your view, has the community at large, people who are not members of the committees that you're members of, do they have input into the planning that's been going on?
Yeah, I think a lot of the planning is long range, and I think the part that I struggle with is that we're giving input to an existing plan that we didn't come up with, right? Someone else decided that this was going to happen, and they showed us a picture of it and said, how do we make it work in your neighborhood, right?
Sure.
And so I don't know how authentic that is, but people are engaged to a degree around that. I would say the broader community, perhaps not, but there are those who have and continue to be involved.
Now, you have been a member of a number of different commissions and committees. Here's a little backgrounder on Kenya.
Kenya McKnight Ahad is a familiar voice at regional forums on transportation, equity, and North Minneapolis. She has served on the Northside Transportation Network, the Northside Greenway, and the Northside Community Work Council.
I grew up in North Minneapolis, and I've been involved in public policy and community work since about 2001.
Kenya has also served on the Northside Economic Opportunity Network, and she's held fellowships with the Humphrey School of Public Affairs, the Bush Foundation, and is a board member on the Alliance for Metropolitan Stability.
As you know, our state is facing a workforce shortage, right?
Yep.
We have a demographic shift that's happening. That's happening in the suburban, greater Minnesota areas where people of color are growing. And I guess we have a couple different options, and the workforce is shrinking. where we have a lot of folks retiring, right? And so now we're grappled with the big question of, you know, how does this affect our economy in the state? And we have a couple opportunities. We can grow a good, strong economy, right, where there's opportunity, where we can get people to fill the jobs that are going to be even more vacant in the next 5 or 7, 10 years. Or we can keep people isolated and not fill those jobs, which will hurt our economy, because we'll grow an economy of one or two things, either an economy of poverty or an economy of opportunity, where people are actually accessing those things. And so I think it is about money, but it is also about prioritization. We have to prioritize what's important for us as a state, and how do we make sure that we keep our economy good and strong, and that people have the opportunity or access to the opportunity to do well. And transportation helps make that possible, because it's about access and connectivity that currently does not exist.
Now, I kind of think that life in North Minneapolis is distorted by our major media here, by television news and the Star Tribune. It's not good news. I kind of think it's a distortion.
Sure.
Am I right? Is it a distortion?
It is, in part. It is definitely criminalized, you know, by our media and other folks. But I think, you know, I've lived there for about 31, 32 years, something like that. There's a lot of goodness. There's a lot of culture. You're comfortable because you're around your people, and we communicate with each other. We have social events, culturally things, and there's a sense of pride for the good things that are happening there and that we do. There's a lot of activities with the youth. You got green neighborhoods, you know, there's a lot of gardening work going on there.
Well, there's a video on Facebook showing you on Mother's Day weekend with looks like a parking lot full of tables with food on it.
Yeah.
What was that about?
Oh, Masjid An-Nur, it's my place of worship. We run a monthly food shelf, and then at time we do big food distributions. Mm-hmm. And so we were giving out food for Mother's Day so folks can have something to cook and eat. And come on down, we have plenty of food. The line is definitely building. We work with the Second Harvest, and sometimes they'll just call us with big shipments of food, and so we just give it out in our community. So we thought we'd do that for Mother's Day.
Well, the few contacts I've had with North Minneapolis, I've been amazed at the community spirit, the organization of people, regular citizens into various groups like you mentioned. Yeah. This is more than just around a school or a sports team. It's about the community, and
overall,
it's led by church and groups like the North Area Achievement Zone, NAS. And
right. I mean, there's like, you know, there's like, I like to say that there's like 1, 2, 3, 4, there's like 5 different sections of North Minneapolis, and each has its own culture. And we're really divided by major transportation corridors, like Ocean Memorial Highway, Broadway, Lowry, and Dowling, and then 44th. Those are major dividing points that create different culture in North Minneapolis. There's a good spirit there, but there's also a lot of struggle, right? There's no question about the fact that there is out of control public safety issues that are happening. There's also a lot of economic oppression. There's also a lot of stress, you know, that people go through every single day from the things that, the systemic things that we have to face, right? I mean, you're fighting against a narrative that in some ways it's a reality, but in other ways, when North Minneapolis is doing well and when there's good things, everybody wants a part of it. But when there's struggle, right, and there's a need for investment, folks don't take part in that. We're talking about a community that has lacked economic investment since the riots, right, when the Jewish community left. And we've had a few, you know, I mean, it's a nonprofit economy there. So, you know, we've had a few investments, but nothing that has been significant enough to overturn the more than 20, 30 years of disinvestment. So there's a lot of segregation. There's a lot of concentrated poverty. There's a lot of stress and depression that comes with that. People, you know, but we make good out of, since we've been in America, that's what we've been doing. So it isn't too much different. I think we just we're going through different generations who deal with it differently. But the same level of oppression economically and socially is there, and the transportation is one of the economic, oppressions, right? I mean, the fact that our community is disconnected from the rest of the region, and the fact that the idea is to bus us to opportunities rather than create them internally as the strategy is also, more telling about what that systemic oppression looks like. And so right now, North Minneapolis has more than 8 transportation projects going all at once. And one of the most inevitable things that will happen is gentrification. And people will say, oh, that's great, that's good, because it'll bring up the value of the city. It'll bring up, the tax base. And, then North Minneapolis would carry its weight. Well, I beg to differ that North Minneapolis probably already carries its weight, probably through the nonprofit structure, but definitely carries some economic power and weight. The issue is that we don't have a strong business economy there, right? Our dollar doesn't circulate. We own businesses, but we don't own the property, right? You have a large property ownership of the Jewish community as well as the governments along West Broadway, right? But we may lease some of the space. Some of the zoning issues or policies, right, restrict certain types of businesses, from being in there. So people are not short on interests and ideas of how to create a better community. What we're short on is access to the players, to the process, to the real resources to really make things happen in our community.
Kenya McKnight Ahad, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah.
Democratic Visions is independently crafted by volunteers, mostly Democrats, from Eden Prairie, Minnetonka, Edina, and Bloomington.